to try to listen to somebody else talk about QA testing, right? How am I supposed to do this?
Okay, today's video is the
And now I gotta listen to some other guy talk.
Interviews, dozens of hours of work, and significant scripting
You
in order to
my
accurately
bad.
and completely expose a corrupt company in video games. That company, which may come as no surprise to most, is Quantic Lab. And the reason for this video is quite simple. Quantic Lab appears to be an abusive work environment with fraudulent and illegal practices, while their net total impact on the gaming world around them is severely negative.
Wait, really? React to your own VOD? Oh, that's funny. Girl animes came up as early as you think. How old is Bubblegum Crisis?
For context, this has been a three-part story.
Cats.
It all began with an anonymous whistleblower who now goes by the name Archangel. This
now this
whistleblower
is
contacted me with extensive internal documentation to support their identity and claims, while alleging that Quantic Lab had had a detrimental impact on the development cycle of Cyberpunk 2077, but more importantly, was lying to their personal clients about project team size and implementing oppressive quotas for their workers, which would hinder
Dude, me and Gino, I literally met Gino at a company that did this, and I was a QA lead there. That's nothing. This isn't anything special so far.
That story exploded across mainstream gaming media. The angle of Cyberpunk 2077 specifically became hyper-focused, and the narrative took shape that this was either a catch-all explanation about why that particular game failed, or an attempt at dodging blame. Various media outlets began to search for statements, CD Projekt Red devs began to allegedly refute the claims, but all of this began to lose sight of what should be the real story here. I don't care if Cyberpunk developers want to scoff at the initial claims. I don't care what they have to say for themselves with regards to how a product as embarrassingly pathetic and broken as Cyberpunk actually gets released onto the mainstream market. They're basically saying, haha, lol, that's so wrong. We definitely knew how broken it was, but released it anyway. Great job, guys. Do you want a cookie for that? Anyway, what I really care about is
what did he just say?
Been happening inside Quantic Lab.
We knew it was broken.
Because that is the real story. My gut told me there was something bigger beneath the surface, and that is precisely what has been found. After my initial coverage that contained whistleblower testimony that Quantic Lab has been lying to clients about team size, which is a serious problem, the CEO of Quantic released a statement. Just to clarify, this is Quantic Lab, a Romanian-based outsourced quality assurance company, not Quantic Dream, an entirely separate development studio. That official statement contains basically nothing. The CEO fixates on the idea that I got some tidbits wrong about the company's initial history, that I don't fully understand the process of outsourced quality assurance, and that—
Dude, it is so funny to see outsiders put together do the detective work and put together like the horrible underpinnings of what goes on in QA, all right? I feel like I sit here and I rant about it every day. 42,000 views, and it's just like
ultimately Cyberpunk failed for reasons other than them, because a lot of outsourced QA teams were—
And I was a QA. How long ago was I a QA tester? It's been over 10 years, 15 years ago. Look, like bad stuff in QA is just gonna keep happening because it's easy to get workers for cheap to work on video games. And you can just keep churning them, and we're gonna make a union. We're gonna so and so, like it's just too coveted of a position to be able to work on video games, and so it's easy to get the labor, and then it's easy to just play these silly games with what you're doing.
Actually involved. Tell you what, in the interest of fairness here, I'll grant all three of these positions. It's entirely possible that I got some small things wrong about their corporate history. It's entirely possible that I did not know, at the time, as much about quality assurance as I could have. And it's also probably true that Quantic is not the primary reason why Cyberpunk 2077 failed, though it did unequivocally and undeniably contribute to that. That statement, if we award them all areas of accuracy in their rebuttal, says nothing to deny allegations about workplace abuse. It says nothing to deny allegations of fraudulent or illegal practices. And today, starting with Quantic Lab, I want to look at the industry of outsourced quality assurance because it's an area that mistreats workers, produces inferior results than it could, and damages the potential of mainstream gaming itself. Let's begin with—
not just mainstream gaming, like like me and Gino met at QA Outsource, where we lied about team size. Like, we did all that. I mean, it's been like this forever. And why would you even pay QA people top dollar? Yeah, you don't need to. Like, literally, there was always pools full of kids. I did the hiring at this place. There were always pools filled with kids or people who couldn't find work otherwise, who would just come to get screwed to work on video games. It's so easy to get workers that you don't have to pay them money or treat them well.
With further coverage. My initial video was based on one primary whistleblower. That whistleblower has said that they will now forward documents to other sources in order to prove their identity if requested, but is not going to have an active role with them or take interviews. Instead, we will start by looking to Romanian news outlets who have begun to pick up and publish testimonials after the fact. First is a Romanian labor market newsletter called Hacking Working Podcast. Everything I discuss will be linked down below just for reference. This newsletter describes an environment where workers are routinely mistreated, but the focal point is a series of testimonials that were brought forward by staff members. Keep in mind, this page is translated via Google, aka imperfect, but I'm still working directly with the original source, Archangel, who translated the key testimony for me in a much more refined way and helped to verify and cross-reference all of these claims.
The market value is lower than minimum wage. No. You do need to be able to read. You do need to be able to write. You do need to be able to problem solve. You do need to be able to communicate, track, and follow directions. And that's all, at least the same skills you need to be able to work at McDonald's at minimum. And you kind of need people who do specialize in different fields, which is why QA is usually used as an introductory or a stepping stone to the industry, which doesn't have nearly enough positions to support even close to the amount of QA testers that you get that you need on a project. Right? If you're on Call of Duty Black Ops, you're on a tester farm with 100 other people, and that's just in America itself, not counting night shift. Because when I was at Activision Call of Duty, I was day shift, Haga was night shift, right? So it's not hyper specialized. It's definitely starter work. There are QA people who lead projects or senior QA testers who do have more experience and are going to be quicker, or QA managers who are going to manage it. And then there is what is it called? It's QA. There's specific QA requirements that need to be met for particular platforms, and I don't know if that's still a thing anymore. What's that called, Gino? Gino taught me how to do that for Sony and for Microsoft. Compliance testing. Yeah. QA testers get paid 30 an hour. Third-party requirements, compliance. There's specific things you need to test for. You need to use specific tools. You need to use specific tools that are specialized to test the network connection, to test the data output that are specific to how the system works. So people need to be taught that, and everybody knows that. So there is a level of specialty as you sort of move up. At the base level, there were people that we still used but should have sent home that couldn't find the tab key on a keyboard. And it's not I'm not making a Simpsons joke, you know. Yeah, compliance, but testers get paid 30 an hour. Yeah, Banshie's at a VR company, Gino. That's why Banshie's testers get paid 30 an hour. You can get paid decent in QA, and there are a higher level QA that require more experience and whatnot. Video game QA at its most basic level is minimum wage, typically with a lot of overtime that you have to rely on to make it. Yeah, exactly. All I gotta do is say VR, investor capital. Everybody there's probably getting paid pretty well at Banshie's place.
Particularly damning are the statements from a former employee named Vlad. Vlad details how Quantic Lab decided to implement a new system called Rocket Chat, but Rocket Chat was a strictly monitored messaging system where the company itself would have full vision and authority over everything. In protest, he changed his avatar to the Korean flag, the North Korean flag, and started calling his friends comrade as a protest of this authoritarian surveillance. Over the next week, Vlad was bounced between meetings and effectively bullied by management into resigning. His coworkers went on to verify that he was forced into resignation, and all because he had made slight disagreements about the total surveillance protocol of worker communications. For our purposes today, try to remember specific key themes. The first of which is employees being forced to resign. Next is a source who claims, quote, "Personally, I was made to lie in report."
That's not special either, and that's not even in games. Like, plenty of jobs do that to people all the time.
reports to clients that there were X testers per project when in fact there were a much smaller number. Some even worked on 3 to 4 projects, and on some days as a team lead, I was alone on the project and logged bugs with multiple database accounts. End quote. The second specific theme here, as a result of that quote, is understaffed but lying to clients about team size. Yet another ex-employee of Quantic Lab came forward, this time discussing localization. All of these have further corroboration from my own sources, so keep that in mind. And from their testimony, there are even more problems. This is where we find issue number 3, which is false representations of capability and security issues. According to this employee, Quantic Lab outsources the work that was already outsourced to them. When vying for contracts, Quantic would lie about native language speakers. They would pretend that they had native speakers on staff of any given language, when in reality, they didn't. After securing the contract, they would then outsource the work from their own company to yet another company, and this source also corroborated the idea that they would often have less than 1/3 of the actual workers for a given project that was advertised, after lying to their clients about team size.
Has this guy been following my life? Actually, I take it back a bit now that it's weird seeing outsiders say this. I'm actually impressed that all this is probably the most thorough I've ever heard this detailed publicly, because this is not, let me tell you, this is not the only company that this is happening at.
This particular source also went on to say how lead testers were often completely inexperienced, which would create a whole new set of problems, and outlined that security was an issue because third parties or freelancers were being advertised as in-house workers, which meant leaks became a considerably more likely prospect. Yet another testimonial corroborated the idea that the company lies about native language speakers, and for more uncommon languages, they will yet again send full video content, dialogue, and other material to third parties, not in-house, which means that the risk of a client non-disclosure being violated rises dramatically. This particular source went on to describe toxic and sexist working conditions, with an emphasis on hiring those with little experience, plus an outline of how oppressive the worker-signed non-disclosure had become as the company tried to insulate itself from liability. The testimony continues, containing allegations that night shift workers were promised meal vouchers but never got them. Salaries were often just late, unexplained, while the company shifted blame to their clients, saying that they themselves had not been paid, so it's normal. And it became clear that the non-disclosure policies that workers were being given routinely were a way to protect the company from its own employees, not a way to protect employees or clients. Next up is Vice Romania, who published a scathing article in follow-up, which cited comments from my own video, but underlines precisely how bad the...
It's called externalization. They do it in low QA all the time. Missing payroll. Yeah. Like, I mean, I've said this story before, but I did not... I was in charge of 3 projects, 2 highly specialized, 1 team of 20 people, and I was not being... we were not tracking on a digital time tracking system yet. I was doing it on paper. And when I put down my hours for overtime, because I had to do 3 end of day reports that I could not do until work actually ended, so I had to be there 30 minutes after work, I would just get my overtime whited out and normal hours written in. And it's just, you don't get paid overtime for work you're required to do after work, right? So that's the closest. I don't think, maybe the full-time employees missed payroll maybe 1 time or something like that. I can't remember, but I was still contract, and I left while still contract. Most QA in general is contract, but yeah, and externalization, yeah, it's super common. Like all these places do that. They tell you we have what you need. What they mean is that we have contacts, that 2 people that may be available to do what you need as far as low QA or QA testing. We have resources, access to the resources, and we can get it. I don't believe they're legally required to say something like, we have full-time employees in office waiting for work now, because the way these companies work is that if they get by because they don't have to pay workers that aren't in the office, because everybody's on contract and very few people are full-time. And so they just contact them when the need arises. So I was at the top of the contract employees, so I was typically one of 6 people in the office. But if we suddenly took a project and we needed 30 people, we don't know if we have them for sure. But we say, yeah, we can do that, and then we go to our pool where we have maybe 100 people, and hopefully most of them are available, right? You do the same thing for localization. You do the same thing for compliance, specialty testing. You do the same thing for focus testing. I don't think there's... I suppose you could be misleading in how you advertise it, but that's just how it works. This is weird. It targets normal testing activities as bad just because normal people don't know it's normal practice. Isn't weird, but some of it feels targeted for no reason. Yeah. I mean, I don't think they're breaking any laws. But the thing is, I believe, the thing is, typically people don't understand what's happening in QA testing, right? And that's why I always laugh when there's these runs of news articles about how bad Blizzard's treating its testers, or how bad Activision's treating its testers, or how everybody's planning to unionize, or how there's going to be this strike or that strike. And people get behind it on Twitter and make some hashtag and retweet stuff, but they don't know that this is how it all works all the time for decades in the first place. And so they find out about it a bit, and then people find that to be disgraceful for 2 weeks, and then they go back to not paying attention. And it continues this way because it can effectively run this way, and everybody involved, it's being accepted on some level because it's functional, right? So yeah, it feels normal. I mean, it shouldn't be this way, but it is this way because the market is currently supporting things this way. You can keep getting more people in. You can supply the need that way. You can subsist as a company in this fashion. And when it comes out, people get upset for a little while, but they still get their video games, right? They falsified answers to their clients' questions. I've seen some of those emails, and they say roughly things along the line of, yeah, we can do that for you. But even if you go to the outsourced website, or the website of the outsourced place I worked for, their pictures on the website aren't at all reflective of how many people are in the office. That's how many people can be in the office, but not how many people are there. So you could argue that that's misleading, but it's also a possibility. But there's no specific language that says at all times we have 30 testers on call, or 30 testers waiting to help you. You just say we can supply what you need. So I mean, I think things are typically worded in a way where you can, where it's not really a legal issue,
Internal working environment has become. This relied less on specific sources and more on general news up to this point, but the trend is becoming clear. Quantic Lab has made every effort to suppress the potential for criticism. They lock their workers inside an iron box of information secrecy and then abuse them. But when the box begins to break, all bets are off. This brings us to my own information, and again, dozens of interviews ranging from 30 minutes to 4+ hours in length with both current and former Quantic Lab employees, plus others in the field, which leads me to making this video. Nearly all of the sources I spoke with asked specifically for anonymity, some because their non-disclosure has not yet expired, others because they still work there, and even more because they work in a somewhat related field now and do not wish to be ostracized from their own current job for whistleblowing against corporate malpractice.
Yeah, that's the main thing.
First up is a source that I will simply call Alex. Alex was a worker at Quantic Lab almost a decade ago. When joining, he was chosen specifically because he spoke English. After about 1 week of training, he was dropped into an active project, and that is when he realized how truly dysfunctional the company was. Alex described to me in great detail how, as far back as 2012 and 2013, there was an oppressive atmosphere of quantity over quality. Quantic Lab would, really, in his own words, prefer 10 bugs that are visual and useless, easy might be a better word there, as opposed to 1 bug that is complex and game-breaking. There was a sense of disappointment if a tester uncovered something major, and the prevailing atmosphere was that when discovering key or large...
So with that whole thing of quantity of bugs versus 1 game-breaking bug, it happens. That's a bad QA practice, but that tends to happen because it's more marketable to say we found a whole bunch of bugs, especially when sometimes when your liaison to the company or whatnot is a layman that doesn't quite understand everything that's going on. And oftentimes I've dealt directly with QA managers that didn't even know anything about QA, or a lot of people like that. Or you're in email chains with people who don't kind of get it. So if you say we found 300 bugs today, they'll be like, oh yeah, this company is really, really worth it, right? As opposed to here are the two bugs we found today that break save data. Right? If you QA test a whole day and you only present 2 bugs, even if they're game-breaking save data horrible bugs, that looks a lot worse than presenting 300 bugs, because it looks like you didn't do any work, and the whole point of QA outsource is to get more work. So that's probably why they favored numbers, and that was a common practice, and it had to be balanced. Like, there is a point where you kind of do need those numbers, because not everybody you're working with understands what you're doing, but you should still make an effort. You should still make an effort to do that high quality, very serious game breaking bug testing. You do need that. You want to put out a good product, but I that's probably like the reasoning behind it. The best way for stuff to change is more games like Cyberpunk 2077 creating negative waves. Maybe, but the culture shifting. I was reading the Elden Ring forums, Steam forums, and people were complaining about the PC having technical issues on release, and but there were also people arguing against it, calling everybody complaining about bugs spoiled. So people are just more accepting of things not working and games being broken these days. So I wonder. It really depends. It's kind of weird how people will change their expectation about that sort of stuff. Or even just beyond video games. The whole world runs on software now. My job is software. DoorDash, right? And that's really buggy sometimes too. And if the whole world runs on software, it should work. But it seems people are kind of prone to just accept the current state of things instead. And just we don't think very highly of QA until, I don't know, maybe an airplane crashes or... or something like that. QA, let me catch up. Hire them year-round instead of on project basis and pay half the costs. When you hire someone for full-time, you can give them any projects you want. I mean, the problem is when you're an outsourced place, especially if you're not gigantic, well-known, and established, you don't have a constant flow of projects yet. And that was what it was like at my company when I was one of the first people there. And so you don't have you didn't even have money to support people on that level. But then, and then as projects get more consistent, then ideally this is how you do it. You pull more people into full time, but you still want to keep growing and expanding. So you're going to have surplus around the edges of what your constant in stream is. So no matter what, you're always going to have people you're letting in and letting go because you're not certain of how great your workflow is going to be. Otherwise, you're going to sink the company. So it kind of has to do with the nature of the companies. You shouldn't lie about all that. But I mean, I think kind of the problem there is HR, or it tends to be presented to people as... People tend to think that it's going to be more stable or more like a 9-to-5. People don't really understand what they're getting into, but it should really be thought more of maybe you should be in the pool for multiple of these companies because they're only going to hire you when they have work. But people don't think about it that way. The HR of any of these companies never present it to you that way. You're part of the family for the 1 month you're there before they let you go, and people feel like the floor drops out from under them, and they feel hurt and lost and disparaged. Really, and the company I was at got in trouble for treating people like full-time workers, making full-time worker demands when they weren't full-time workers as well, which is also bad. So that's bad on all sides, but it really is kind of the nature of QA outsource, kind of, to be honest. Coding used to be reserved for nerds and people who tinkered with quality work. Software engineers, it pays well, don't have the inner drive of producing good code. I mean, we don't need to, like most things, we don't make it any better than we need it to be. Or it can end up that way, right? And that's kind of the market decision. So Cyberpunk was enough of a debacle that they had to backpedal on that, issue refunds, and you can't put out anything that broken again. But basically the market's just going to see where the line is for that, what people are willing to pay for, and the public decides with their money is what it ultimately comes down to. It's not a question of for the individual, sure, it's a question of principles, but for the market, it's a question of money. It's a question of money.
Issues, testers were wasting everyone's time and should instead be pumping up the numbers. Alex also went into great detail about the division of labor at Quantic Lab and described a format of 3 divisions. First is console compliance testing. This is where employees remain the longest, since there is a rigorous set of parameters given by the publishers, Microsoft and Sony. Compliance testing is a very common thing for console releases. Alex relayed to me that it is not uncommon to find workers who stayed in that particular role for many years, but when shifting departments to either mobile devices or major PC game testing, that is where things fell apart. Alex alleged that during his time at the company, the owner and CEO opened a U-Test account. For those that don't know, U-Test is a mobile device testing website where you can earn some cash for testing applications. Once he had his personal account, he retasked the entire mobile department of Quantic Lab to work under his personal screen name on that third-party application testing website, thus using company time and company salaries to earn himself income on their labor on a personal account. And a few months later, he bought himself a luxury car with the funds and bragged about it. Alex went on.
Wait, what? What did he do? U-Test account. Hold on a second.
Major PC game testing. That is where things fell apart. Alex alleged that during his time at the company, the owner and CEO opened a U-Test account.
Okay.
For those that don't know, U-Test is a mobile device testing website where you can earn some cash for testing applications. Once he had his personal account, he retasked the entire mobile department of Quantic Lab to work under his personal screen name on that third-party application testing website, thus using company time and company salaries to earn himself income on their labor on a personal account. And a few months later, he bought himself a luxury car with the funds and bragged about it. Alex went on to discuss a major MMO project.
So basically, their company couldn't get projects directly, so he got projects through U-Test and made the people at his company work through U-Test. I mean, that's weird. And he bought himself a car. Well, that's still income coming into his company, but yeah, I don't know if that is legally questionable. It's definitely kind of odd. It could be tax evasion, but he probably paid more taxes if it was private income. Yeah, he probably did. It's just not very profitable long run. Yeah, that's just odd. I know that probably presents to people as horrendous, but that's just strange. Because that's what he's supposed to be going out and getting those clients. So he couldn't do it. He found it through that website and then had everybody work on his account on that website. I don't understand. I don't understand what's really beneficial about that aside from getting work when I guess you couldn't find it otherwise. But, Problem comes when the market doesn't have a choice. All software options are buggy. How do you vote for quality code with your wallet? Yeah, I mean, you can't let it get to that point, but you made the mistake earlier by the market just accepting lots of buggy stuff, right? You have to reject it at your line. And I mean, I believe people are actually doing that, and their line is further back than I believe it should be, but I spent 5 years in QA. I don't understand the desire to be in QA forever, which some people have. Not many people actually have the desire to be in QA forever. Very, very few people do. And those that do can usually succeed into some long-term leading position. You can go work for a really good software company. You can end up at Microsoft or something like that doing QA testing there and make a decent living for the rest of your life. Most people in video game QA are, design grads, musicians, people usually not coders, because coders it's a lot easier to monkey bar your way in. art people, like people who are hoping to get into some other position, but a game company might only have 3 positions and they might have 40 testers. Or you might be at some outsourced place where if you don't really know how to make the connections through that, you might not really be getting anywhere. So, but most people don't desire to stay in QA forever. They just believe QA will be their entryway. And I mean, I guess sure, technically it's a foot in the door. You can step into video game offices, but you really gotta politic. You gotta shake hands. You gotta use it like anything else to get that position. And I don't necessarily think that's bad, but usually it's a lot of very young people who haven't learned that elsewhere and will first learn it through video games and will feel disgruntled as a result of not going anywhere in that fashion. But yeah, there's not enough game positions for everybody who wants to work in games, and not everybody who shows up that wants to work in games should work in games. I've met some very dumb people in QA who are not just dumb, but maybe people just don't want them around, right? And so a lot of this ends up with bitterness. Like, sure, there's a lot wrong with QA. Sure, there's a lot it should be done different. Sure, you can blame the companies for a lot, but a lot of times there's inexperience and not understanding labor force, and it's just you're dealing with being a kid, you know. I immediately say like it's just like if it's your first job, you don't have context for what what you're really going in, what you're really going to do. HR can game that a bit, and so like but there's you have to acknowledge your own value, and it's hard to understand what kind of value you as a worker or an individual or a person when you haven't worked at all yet. You just you just got off the school conveyor belt, and your first introduction to the world of adulting is doing all-nighters at a video game company, right? Dev QA treatment is getting better, but pay still sucks. Yeah, if you want to make money, don't get into video games. Even programming, you make less money programming in video games than you do in almost anything else. Don't do it for money. QA in-house is pretty decent for certain European companies. Yeah, same thing here. Like if you get in-house QA at Treyarch or Naughty Dog, like places like that, Insomniac. Gino was I don't know if Gino wants me to say where he had worked, right? But you can get better pay, but not just being there, because you can still be contract there, but there are further you can move up into higher positions, senior testers, salaried positions. You can do decent in some places, but if you take QA in as a whole, and the number of QA testers that were probably active QA testing games today in the game industry, the majority of them were making peanuts. And it's just how QA testing works. Sometimes you just need a lot of bodies to push up against all of the boundaries of your open world game and make sure they have collision.
Where a team of 30 testers was filled almost completely by hiring brand new employees, and that they simply didn't have enough equipment even for those employees to use, so they rotated in shifts, which meant that some team members were being completely overworked at strange hours of the night, and the overall productivity radically decreased. When something inevitably went wrong with a major contract, Alex was forced to leave. The company began pressuring senior team members to quit, and eventually Alex was made to sign what are called exit papers, which means he technically quit, but did so under duress with coercion. This is where I learned about what is probably a core issue at Quantic Lab, and that is the grace period. Romanian labor laws are not the same as the United States. In Romania, there is what's called a grace period, where you can either be fired without cause or quit without notice. That grace period is 3 months long, and if you make it through that 3-month-long period, you must give notice before you quit or provide cause on the side of the employer. You have to provide cause for termination when you get rid of someone. Quantic Lab, according to numerous sources that I spoke with, as well as testimony from the previous labor newsletter, does not care in the slightest about this, even though it is a law in Romania.
Yeah, duh.
One source I spoke with, I'll call him Thomas, detailed how both he and his friend were forced out so that the company could hire fresh workers with less pay. There was even an example given of an employee being forced to sign exit papers after the grace period had ended thus illegally firing them or illegally forcing them to quit, and then forcing them to leave the building before they had even collected all of their personal belongings. According to Thomas, who gave me lengthy testimony on the subject, a specific example of lying to clients was within a project called Wreckfest, where Quantic Lab did not have even remotely close to the number of workers that they promised, and instead decided to outsource a portion of the work to India. What's worse, he then describes a new issue. Quantic Lab...
So they just outsourced to India but didn't tell them? Because I was on a project outsourced to India, and the manager did horrible stuff. Right, you get a list of 6 directions in an email: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and number 4 says don't do number 1. Right, and what this man, and I'm not even exaggerating there. Direction number 4 said don't do direction number 1, and when everything would just be a volcanic explosion and disaster, she would blame the Indian QA team. But they were aware that they also had Indian testers, because it's a lot cheaper to get testers from India than hiring workers locally that you have to pay more money, and then you just have the testers from India push against the wall. And she was usually blaming most things on them, but eventually I had to interface directly with the leads and the testers at India, and they were all actually really intelligent. Her directions were terrible, but yeah, that's super common. Truth of the matter is, very few companies are optimal. When you're optimal, someone has to pay the costs. When you tax profits, you make it harder and harder to operate. Yeah, like, I mean, why would the company be like they want profit? Well, I mean, what on planet Earth is optimal, really? Anyway, right?
Allegedly asked employees to give them money back after being paid. Why on earth would they do this? It sounds bizarre, I know, but let me explain. Romanian labor laws, if I have the percentages wrong, please let me know in the comments down below, but Romanian labor laws require that workers be given between 50% and 75% additional pay during overtime work. On holidays, that requirement increases to 100%. But at Quantic Lab, according to my source,
really?
They were demanding money back from employees after they worked their overtime without negotiating the policy with them first. Furthermore, discussing your salary...
Negotiating? Didn't I just say that, like, what, 10 minutes, 20 minutes ago? Right? That my overtime was getting whited out? Like, yeah, this isn't just Quantic Labs. It's like, this isn't just Quantic Labs.
...be cause for termination. The system relied on workers having no idea what each other were making, because the primary goal was to force senior employees out, hire brand new workers for a fraction of the cost, and continue to do this knowing that younger workers have little to no knowledge of labor rights, so they can be sat down later, coerced into signing exit papers, which means they technically quit even though they're being forced out, and the cycle can start all over again. I suppose
that's most companies. Twitch, right? Well, like Twitch, you couldn't disclose how much income you were having. You still technically can't, right? Even if you're an affiliate, until the Twitch leaks happened, and then everybody. I mean, they're not necessarily being paid directly by the company with Twitch per se, all right? But that's common. All companies don't want everybody else to know what everybody else is making. I mean, has this YouTuber ever had a day job?
Spoke with multiple additional sources corroborating the issue of localization. For those unaware, localization is when you translate and modify a game to be shipped and played in a different region with a different language.
Viola.
But having talked with people in that particular department, past and current, Quantic Lab would make frequent and inaccurate statements to clients about the number of native language speakers on staff, or even fluent language speakers that they had on staff. When a Chinese project came along, Quantic would say, "We have 4 native..."
Yeah. Punishing somebody for their paycheck is illegal, but not disclosing that information. Oh, wait. I mean, I guess I don't know if Twitch ever said it punished. I wonder how it's actually listed in everything that you sign for. But I think Twitch does a lot of stuff that's probably barely legal, honestly.
Chinese speakers, which is a big deal. But in reality, they had 1 or 2. And if they had 2, only one of them was actually native. The other simply knew some Chinese. Keep in mind, when you're translating or localizing a video game, it's very, very important to have a comprehensive understanding of the native language. Like, you really need this level of detail to make it a good game. Advertising that you have that while you don't have that is probably a big deal. What's worse, on multiple localization contracts, testers were forced to take this is what they were devolved into doing. They were forced to take screenshots of the game dialogue and go to outside third-party translation websites just to know what they were doing on the quest, what they should do for the objective. They had zero knowledge of the language, and yet Quantic Lab was translating and localizing the game while forcing them to effectively do their work and testing through shit-tier translation algorithms on third-party websites.
Yeah, that happens too. That happens too. If they don't have, I mean, that just happens because you don't always have access to the upper echelon. Like sometimes you'll have different levels of people who are good at translating or good in both languages, right? Like we had people who were often around who were fluent in English and Japanese, but they weren't always available. Sometimes they were working on something else. And then you would go with somebody who kind of knew, who didn't know. Should you do that? I mean, no, probably not. But you're always charging the same rate, but you don't necessarily have access to the same level or quality of translator. Not everyone's a translator / linguist. Yeah, but some might. Yeah. Well, Viola, you're very fluent in a lot of languages, right? But and sometimes you won't even have the necessary information in your own language. Sometimes you don't have access to the text files internally. Sometimes you didn't get internal design documentation that shows you how to get the secret quests. So you have to go find it on the internet somewhere else. Or it's just not a clean process. And I just think this sounds like it's an assumption that everything operates very very professionally, very cleanly. You always present a professional front, and I mean, what company wouldn't do that, right? But it's just not always the case. It's messy. It's a messy operation. In this, I'm not saying it's necessarily good, but it's always messy. Pretty much always. Getting the text Bible is such a pain. Yeah, it really can be, right? Even when you're in a localization specific game, it can just be hard to get access to a lot of stuff that would make your life easier. And sometimes they just don't want to give it to you for weird reasons. We want you to see it in the game. We want you to play it normally, but we want it done in this amount of time. Like sometimes the developers don't understand. Sometimes you have the developers understand, the testers understand, management understands on all sides, but there's one guy, right? Like maybe he's an editor at the company who culturalizes the text and just has a stick up his butt about how it's gonna be like letting the QA testers see the text Bible. It's his, it's guarded, and it's precious. And I'm not naming names or games, but there's definitely been an experience where some people are just more difficult than they really need to be because you're just dealing with egos sometimes. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just sloppy practice and you're just trying to do stuff to make money, right?
Because they just didn't have the experience or qualifications. According to another worker, I'll call them Duke, there were constantly 5, 10, even 15 brand new hires on any project because many of the employees that they picked up would quit within the span of just a couple of weeks. Totally inexperienced workers were being given crucial company tasks, and even internal conversations would acknowledge on the topic of Cyberpunk 2077 specifically, yeah, we really fucked this one up. Not because they had a choice, not because they wanted to, but because the corporate governance at Quantic Lab is allegedly so bad that quality work is almost completely stifled. Summarizing the testimony I was given, Quantic Lab operates a working environment where there is just too much pressure. Little to no honesty with clients on actual team size or qualifications, incredible employee turnover and lack of experience, lack of security by outsourcing what is already outsourced to them, to other freelancers, and then providing them with video and audio and text and everything that's probably violating non-disclosure. Anyway, aggressive and possibly illegal tactics to force senior employees out, deceptive overtime pay practices, dishonest pretenses to secure contracts, such as, but not limited to, hiring brand new staff to puff up their team size beforehand and get more money before signing, or lying about native language speakers in localization, and all of this combined with aggressive non-disclosure agreements, surveillance, employee monitoring, and more, contributes to a dysfunctional workflow that is detrimental to nearly every single project that they are given. I have no doubt at all in my mind that they will look into the prospect of legal action against me personally for publishing this. I am 100% ready. I do not have any confidential documents in my possession. I was given access, but I did not hold on to nor distribute any of them. I have a healthy community behind me, and I am ready to stand up to the corporate malpractice of an abusive company. No doubt in my mind that this is one of those battles that come along every once in a while that I should and will choose. However, that's not the entire point of the video. As I explored this topic, I learned a great deal about the general outsourced QA industry, and oddly enough...
wait, before he gets to that, all of that, everything he discovered here and listed is all 100% true. But one thing that I guess he's not touching on because he's focusing on the QA companies is sometimes the publishers know all this and they push the game out anyway. They push the game out anyway to meet their goals, to meet their deadlines, to line up with their marketing push timeline. Like I've worked on games that were this busted, bugs in the database about you shoot guys and they don't take damage in certain parts of their body and the game goes out to public. And you know what? Sometimes the game still succeeds. Bugs get patched 1 week or 2 weeks later. Like now he's being a bit too over the top. Well, maybe a little bit, but it's just he has an outside perspective on all of this, and he's approaching this as a journalist doing detective work, right? And dug up something that I suppose to him didn't exist before, where I'm here articulating the other side of it, and a lot of us have experience in software development positions where it's just sort of like, yeah, buddy. Yeah. But it only continues as they can get away with it. And Quantic Lab isn't the only company doing that. And I'm sure places I've been, maybe they're probably still doing things like that. But it's the nature of things, and it hasn't had to change. And people ultimately don't care as long as they get a pretty decent game in their hand. And you only see adjustments once it affects the bottom line of the devs and the publishers. So, and the bottom line of the devs and the publishers is affected by people buying the product that's put out. So ultimately it still comes down to voting with your dollars. And Cyberpunk was probably maybe the first time this was ever actually across the line to the public, because I've been on stuff that I thought was across the line, but it went over okay. But Cyberpunk was huge, prolific. People had a lot of expectations, and it failed to deliver. But that's how you affect change. You decide with your purchasing. You don't go and fight people on message boards because you don't want to think that your 5 months or whatever, how many years of waiting for this are wasted. Your $60 are wasted because you're emotionally attached to be a defender of something bad. All right. If you think Sonic is ugly in the Sonic movie, you should complain, and then maybe he'll get turned to look at something better. The money to pay for all the things he likes is going to come from, if it's so simple, why is it? Literally, none of it is illegal. Yeah, that's sort of the thing, right? Experiences, medical devices, it's actually important that things work correctly. It's how a lot of companies work. They're either run by incapable or unscrupulous people, or they just don't need to change. You can tell somebody, you need to exercise, you need to exercise, you need to exercise, you have a bad heart, or tell them to stop smoking because they feel better in the moment or something like that, right? Maybe it's not the best analogy. I'm not that good at very simple analogies, but this doesn't change because it doesn't need to change. It doesn't have to change. It's not even about in individuals. There's been people in positions of power that I've known in these big companies that had good intentions and wanted the company to work in a better way, but systemically, they had to get that line green. They had to get stuff out of the red. Like there's some certain things that need to be made, and if things don't fall over, if the truck doesn't fall over and it's still running, then it just kind of keeps running, right? Too many fanboys voting with your dollars. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly my point, right? When I see people, but it does happen, right? You can vote with your dollars. You can vote by being vocal. It does happen. Cyberpunk was too much of a stink. Ugly Sonic didn't happen in the Sonic movie are the two examples of public response coming to mind. You do matter in mass or at a certain level. Also, if you could convince the company, hey, more money could be made if you did things other way, right? But people invest themselves in stuff for different reasons, odd reasons, and it's not always about getting something that is objectively worth their money, right? Like sometimes people are surfing on the hype wave and they don't want to fall off their board because that wave feels good. It's not a rational process. It's not this slow, rigorous, belabored value judgment that people are making. Some people are loyal to platforms and companies and systems and IPs and famous devs and a lot of stuff like that, you know, and they'll sit there and they'll eat poo-poo sometimes. And tell you they like it with a mouthful of it. Because people aren't rational like that. And it's a lot of it is marketing's job to tap into that. So, and it has to get to the point where it's so bad that you'll get a response. And it's like I've said a couple times, it's not individuals. Sometimes it's not even the companies. It's just the nature of the market in general is seeing where that line is. And you'll have some people who still want to do outstanding work and some companies that are going to do outstanding work. But things are going to level out to it's just to how little can we do for how much you will accept, how much the public will accept. I shouldn't say you because that's individual. The public is deciding en masse. So, yeah.
Enough, it's not unilaterally similar. Video game QA, at least in terms of outsourced companies.
Wait, hold on. Let me catch up to you guys first. It's not exactly company's fault. It's called by incentives making honest behavior and profitable. You asked for these laws. Now get what you deserve. Worst thing is that trucks don't fall over for a long time. Managers responsible for tipping are long gone by then, who got great new jobs after showing how much they improved things at their last company. Yep, that is not graduating laterally. Getting promoted laterally. So you just keep going to each. I could name a name of somebody who was terrible, horrible at their job, but kept getting promoted to higher and higher positions because they would go to sinking ships, get a higher position because they were kind of in need, and then leave before things completely capsized or whatever. And then you just do a couple jumps like that, and you're in a huge management position, and nothing's ever really your fault. Maybe having some friends is good to avoid bad recommendations, but yeah. Companies are angry. Companies are not angry. A company is an impersonal entity that's seeking profit. That's what a company is doing. They're not mad at you. So if the way in which that profit comes is by skirting these lines and doing these things that are not illegal, then yeah, all the companies are going to start being grifters. Unless you punish or incentivize that correctly, there's no reason. They have no reason to change, right? And at least in America, legally, they're trying to do and meet investors and stockholders, right? But there's nothing emotional about this process. There's nothing emotional about this process. And a company can be. I've been at companies that I thought had a lot of great people in them, but it's the model is. You could argue the model could be corrupted, but it's not corrupted enough to dissolve itself and fall over, so it'll stand. But it's not going to change until it is proven that it can't stand anymore. Yeah. Many decision makers. That was another thing I wanted to hit. Many decision makers are too far removed from the effects of bad decisions. Yep. A sales guy, the colleague of him brought a device to the client. The device wouldn't start. Doctor took out. Wait. What? You once heard from a sales guy that a colleague of his brought a device to a client. The device wouldn't start. The doctor took out a pistol and at gunpoint told the guy, "You make it work now." The management structure that leads to device failure rate is not nearly affected by the client's outrage. Yeah, if you're the CEO of a company, and I sat close to CEOs of some large companies, right? And I got to sit in some big meetings because even as a QA tester, I understood. So I'd been studying Unity and creating video games, right? So I understood a lot of the process. So I was saying some pretty helpful stuff. So one of my managers started to bring me into stuff like that. And a lot of these guys were pretty decent guys. Not all of them, right? And a lot of them were pretty smart guys. But the thing is, when you're on top of this superstructure of a huge tower and there's 10 pipes sending, I don't know, sending water out to the people of the city or whatever, if two of those pipes are broken and water isn't going to those towns, that information sometimes doesn't even go all the way back up to the top. Because along the way, you have a lot of people who don't want this bad report to go through and cost them their job, or some people who don't even know how much it matters, or some people who don't care about this or that. Like, sometimes it's not even going all the way back up. And so what a lot of these guys are doing is they're sitting in a boardroom and they've got some pie charts, they've got some bar graphs, they've got some lines going up and down, and they've got green numbers and red numbers, and people who hopefully you can trust bringing you reports. And they're not always just getting clean information. And so I would be there and I would just kind of be like, no, that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening. Like, that's just kind of the long and short of it. And I mean, in an ideal company, right, everybody's being treated well, everybody's being honest, all information is flowing completely, and everybody's content working there, both clients and the company, and everybody wins, ideally, right? But it's kind of like Katie did said earlier, not everything's running efficiently and not everything's running ideally. But it doesn't have to, because the goal of a lot of this stuff, especially once your company gets big enough, is just keeping the beast alive, the truck not falling over. We on the end, as I guess in this case as game players, we want a really good, really high quality game, right? But once a company gets big enough, the goal is just to keep the company alive, right? And everything else is kind of secondary to that. Drogon, hello, welcome.
Company options is in a terrible place, but not all QA industries suffer from this. In my interviews, I spoke with people who work both in-house and externally for EA, Bethesda, Ubisoft, and Activision. And what I found was troubling. Quantic Lab is not alone. While I do believe it's one of the more severe examples in the industry, the idea of outsourced quality assurance operating like a pufferfish of sorts is widespread. When attempting to secure contracts, more workers equals more bargaining power and more money. So multiple companies in the space will engage in an elastic hiring process where they onboard fresh hires and then downsize later because they can maximize the contract payout. This obviously leads to a lack of quality results because they simply bring these people in to jack up the contract value, but again, it is less severe than what we see with Quantic Lab. I have spoken with people inside Global Step, Keywords, a now defunct company called VMC, and an outsourced Indian giant called HCL. It is alleged that HCL will literally buy out smaller companies just to weasel their way back into contracts with Microsoft that they have been kicked out of. I've heard stories about a 30-man team at Global Step in particular that went through over 100 people in 2 years because no one stays long enough to even get proper experience. I have learned that the worker treatment in video game QA in particular is abysmal, and as a result of corporate malpractice, results are tainted. Bug quotas extend well beyond Quantic Lab, and while some companies wake up to the damage that they cause, some don't. Testers in video games who successfully leave the industry for, say, banking, according to another source that I talked with extensively, are getting triple the pay for a fraction of the work, with a smaller team size and better retention.
Yeah.
That's not a result of the work alone being explicitly easier, that's a result of the workflow itself being legitimately functional. To everyone working in video game quality...
Yeah, but also it's banking, all right? Like, the stakes are a lot higher. It's not video games. There's just more money flowing around there in general, and they kind of have to be a little bit better there. But well said, Drogan. A company tries to look good in spite of their team. One tries to look good because their teams did good, and there's just not as many as of the latter as there should be, as we would like there to be. But again, they just can't insist. People live in delusions of thinking most companies don't operate in crippling debt and are zombies, basically. You can get so many loans on low credit that you use to fill holes, then take more loans to pay for. Yeah, so many companies are consistently in debt. Low interest rates, low profits make exploiting loans incentivize. Yeah.
Quality assurance, you deserve better than the standards that this industry currently has. Other industries are far better, and this one can be too. To everyone specifically in Romania subjected to the practices of a company like Quantic Lab, you deserve better as well. Outsourced QA is advertised to clients as a cost-effective option with greater results and superior workflow, just all around better. But reality could not be further from that claim.
What?
In the world of reality, outsourced QA is underpaid,
No, it's
underappreciated, mistreated, and sometimes abused.
Everything is.
Inexperienced workers are funneled
Presented
through a
better.
pipeline that does not care about them and cares least of all, ironically, about the quality of what they produce. In the case of Quantic Lab, they receive outsourced work and then allegedly outsource it again, breaking all pretense of security and quality, because their corporate environment has become so toxic it can barely function. For others, maybe it's not so bad, not quite so bad. In-house QA, from my sources in particular, is far less volatile and mismanaged, but radically underpaid still, and thus talented hires who the company could very much use and probably should retain will leave quickly without a second thought. I'm sure that there are companies out there doing it right, but the industry standard that I have seen, at least, after dozens of interviews, hours of work, and extensive research, is rock bottom, even when compared to other similar fields. Quality assurance and quality control are incredibly important for video games, but right now it is treated by corporate management as a...
Apparently it's not, because people don't care until it gets as bad as Cyberpunk, so it's not that important. They could just fix it with a patch.
Cash grab joke. It's unfair to workers, it's unfair to clients and publishers, and lastly, it's unfair to customers who ultimately buy the products. Quantic Lab in particular seems to be one of the greatest offenders in all this, and I'm sure that more information will come out. I'm sure that more articles may be written. Whatever it is, more people may come forward with their experience, which I encourage. But yeah, that's it. I hope that something can change, but that remains to be seen. If you want to support me, my work, or the channel in general, please check out the links down below. I'll continue to look at this story, but for the near future, coverage may shift back to other topics. And I want to say thank you to everyone I spoke with who had the courage to come forward. Maybe we can spur change. I'm not sure. I hope so. That's it. I'll keep the outro short. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.
I mean, he did a good job, honestly, for somebody outside. So, man, this is always my message to Viola when Viola asks for game dev and game industry advice. This is only going to change so much. The way that you don't get screwed is you acknowledge your own value and work towards having your own value acknowledged. And that probably goes beyond even workforce, just life in general, you know. People make claims about the rich taking his profit. Reality, the company is insolvent and isn't making nearly enough money. Yeah, that's not understanding how it works, right? Yeah. QA is like janitors. No, it is. It's only a cost in the books. I mean, you do need you do need some good QA testers, but it was like I was saying earlier, sometimes you just need people to bump up against the boundaries and knock stuff around. But yeah, you have to acknowledge your own value as an individual, as a worker, as a person. You have to acknowledge the value of your time, and you have to acknowledge what kind of treatment you will tolerate and deserve to tolerate, and not stand for that, because people aren't going to stop buying these games. Obviously, it has to be as bad as Cyberpunk was before people change. And what this guy described here, I literally spent over a year at a company where all of this was common practice. So it's sure, we can do stuff systemically. We can do stuff with laws to make it better. Sure, a lot of things should change in a lot of different ways. But in the meantime, like, you need to think about yourself. Anything apart from sales team is a cost in the books. That's true. But and the thing about treating workers better or expecting your job to care about you, a job that cares about you is a luxury. Like, that's nice, but companies are under no obligation to care about you as an individual. You need to care about yourself. And then say, your company doesn't care about me. I have amassed this much value. I contribute this much value to the company, and I won't stand for it. Pay me more, treat me better, or I leave, and they can make their choice. And in the instance of QA testing, there's always more QA testers. There's always more kids who don't have any other jobs to contrast it against. There's kids who don't know their value in the workforce, workspace, or in life. And you can just keep hiring them into the tester farms. You can use people who don't speak English as their first language, so all this nuance would be lost to them anyway. You can get outsource stuff to other countries. You know, like, you got to make the decisions for yourself.